We're all together now, and welcome to the Buddhist Society in this very special evening when we are introducing Imma Ramos, who is the curator at the British Museum. But um, just a quick word, the title of the talk is Tantra to Revolution, and it was an exhibition that was on from the 24th of September 2020 to the 24th of January 2021. And I, for one, missed the exhibition, and really regretted missing it. And part of the reason for that was because of lockdown. I know that some in the audience have actually managed to get there, Lavinia being one of them, she told us before. But it's my great privilege to introduce Imma Ramos, who is the curator of the medieval to modern South Asian collections at the British Museum. And she's also the author of the accompanying book, which presents the first historical exploration of Tantric visual culture from its origins in India to its reimagining in the West. And there is a book which came out with the exhibition. Lavinia, could you just hold it up? Can't really see it very clearly. But anyway, there is a beautiful book which came out with the exhibition, and that is available from your local bookshop. And so you can have something really very special which you can hang on to. The images are absolutely fantastic. Her research, Imma's research interests revolve around the relationship between religion, politics, and gender in South Asian visual culture. The talk will last until about 7:15, and any questions, please type them in the chat thing at the bottom, and then I'll read them out because it sort of simplifies things a bit. And well, without more ado, so thank you very much, Imma, for coming. Thank you so much for spending this lovely evening with us. Thank you. So over to you now.
Thank you very much, Desmond, and to the Buddhist Society for inviting me. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint with you now. So hopefully you should be able to see that slide. And I'm really delighted, as I say, to have been invited to talk about the Tantra exhibition, which I recently curated at the British Museum. And the central aim of the show was essentially to demystify Tantra and challenge the stereotype, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with in the West, that it's a hedonistic guide to sex. The first major exhibition of Tantric material culture in the West was held in 1971 at the Hayward Gallery in London. It was advertised as an exhibition exploring the Indian cult of ecstasy, reflecting a particular reading of Tantra as a so-called cult that could overcome stifled attitudes to sexuality. This was very much a product of Tantra's reception in the West during the 70s, but the idea still persists today. So what exactly is Tantra? Tantra is an Indian philosophy which affirms all aspects of the material world as sacred and infused with divine feminine power. It teaches that enlightenment can be achieved rapidly by actively engaging with spiritual obstacles, such as desire, aversion, and fear, in order to ultimately transcend them. Tantric imagery is therefore unique in its inclusion of erotic and macabre symbolism. The central aim of the show and the accompanying book was to present the first historical exploration of Tantric visual culture from its origins in India to how it was reimagined in the West. Tantra is rooted in sacred instructional texts composed from around the 6th century onwards, called the Tantras. These are often written in the form of a dialogue between a god and a goddess. We open the exhibition with some of the earliest surviving Tantras in the world on loan from Cambridge University Library. The exhibition was then divided into 4 major sections, which explored Tantra's links to successive waves of revolutionary thought, from its early medieval transformation of Hinduism and Buddhism to the Indian fight for independence and the rise of 1960s counterculture in the West. The show presented an examination of Tantra through a series of visual case studies, some of which I'm about to talk to you about, almost all from the British Museum's collection, to illustrate a history of Tantra beyond the texts, which usually receive the most attention from scholars of the philosophy. The Tantras can be enormously enriched by an understanding of the material objects to which they gave rise. The range of objects in the exhibition included representations of Tantric deities and Tantric practitioners, objects used in Tantric practice, and objects that reflect reimaginings as well as misunderstandings of Tantra. Above all, the aim was to provide visitors with the tools for recognizing certain signs and signifiers, from skull cups and weapons to sexual acts, as specifically relating to the Tantric imaginary, in order to understand how its philosophy has been visualized throughout history. Each of these signs carries a range of different associations and meanings depending on the object's original intended audience, from rulers and lay devotees to monks and yogis, as well as its context, whether public or private. The first major section of the exhibition explored the rise of Tantra in medieval India, followed by an examination of the role of Tantric yoga at the court in early modern India. The development of Tantra in India coincided with the rise of many new kingdoms across the subcontinent after the decline of the Gupta Empire. Although this led to political precariousness, there was also a great flourishing of the arts. Many rulers were drawn to Tantra's promise of power, and public temples often incorporated Tantric deities as guardians. This included the Tantric god Bhairav, seen here. He's the Tantric manifestation of the Hindu god Shiva, who delights in defying social and religious boundaries. According to myth, Bhairav beheaded the orthodox god Brahma, who had insulted Shiva. Bhairav wandered across cremation grounds as penance, using Brahma's skull as an alms bowl. The story reveals the tensions between orthodox and Tantric Hindu traditions, the display of Bhairav's strength symbolizing the superior powers of the Tantric path. Here, Bhairav clutches Brahma's severed head. In his other hand, he holds a trident, a sword, and a 2-headed drum, which Shiva uses to drum the universe into creation and dissolution. Early Tantric practitioners imitated Bhairav's appearance and behavior by carrying their own skull cups and dwelling in cremation grounds in order to emulate him and overcome obstacles to enlightenment, such as disgust, fear, and attachment. Rulers worshipped him in order to strengthen their political positions, drawing on his immense power. Here, Bhairav appears naked, a wild shock of hair streaming out of his head like fire. His arched eyebrows, bulbous eyes, and fangs reveal a controlled fury. A dog, one that feeds on decaying flesh, accompanies him. This stone carving was made for a temple commissioned by a member of the Chola court in southern India. It shows how fierce Tantric deities were brought into the public and popular arena of temple worship during the medieval period. The rise of Tantra within Buddhism occurred in response to its rise within Hinduism, creatively adapting by incorporating Tantric deities and altering them to suit Buddhist goals. These are 2 Tantric Buddhist gods who have incorporated many of Bhairav's attributes. It reveals the fluidity between Hinduism and Buddhism, but also shows competition. The bronze figure looks like Bhairav, but he's actually trampling the Hindu god Bhairav under his foot. This part of the exhibition also explored Tantra's radical challenge to gender norms. Tantra presented a new worldview which saw all material reality as animated by Shakti, divine feminine power. This worldview inspired the dramatic rise of goddess worship in medieval India. Tantric goddesses challenged traditional models of womanhood as passive and docile in their intertwining of destructive and maternal power. The earliest known text to describe the idea of Shakti is the Devi Mahatmya, or Glory of the Goddess. This is a folio from a later edition. It tells the story of the goddess Durga, who defeats a series of demons embodying ignorance, who the gods had been unable to defeat. Durga's death blow became a popular subject in medieval temple sculpture. Here, an 8th century sculpture represents Durga as a weapon-wielding, lion-riding warrior who has defeated the buffalo demon Mahisha, who threatened the stability of the universe. She was adopted by many rulers as their guardian and regarded as a source of their strength. In the Devi Mahatmya, a group of tantric goddesses called the Matrikas, or mothers, helped Durga to defeat the demons. Their martial abilities were harnessed by rulers to ensure victories on their own battlefields. This is a temple sculpture of the sow-headed mother Varahi. She carries a skull cup containing wine or blood. This is a recurring tantric attribute. Here we see Chamunda, the leader of the mothers. She's skeletal to signal her constant hunger, which she satisfies by consuming demonic forces. She carries a sword of wisdom with which she destroys not only demons, but also obstacles to enlightenment. She dances on a corpse, which embodies the fragile human ego that must be overcome. Although she appears fierce, she also conveys compassion and a desire to assist followers on their spiritual path by releasing them from ignorance. In the exhibition, her symbolism was decoded. This was an interpretive strand that ran throughout the exhibition. In each section, we highlighted an object that demanded extra unpacking, and we decoded its symbolism using specially designed graphics. This also helped us with the challenges of the exhibition's word limit. Each object label could only be around 80 words max, and group labels could only be about 120. We worked closely with an interpretation officer to ensure that the language and tone was as accessible as possible. Luckily, the accompanying book presented an opportunity to expand further on the subject and go into greater depth beyond the parameters of the exhibition. This 10th century tantric goddess from Tamil Nadu represents a yogini. From a distance, her voluptuous nudity attracts the eye and invites the viewer to approach, but closer observation reveals the fearsome details of her fangs, angrily arched eyebrows, and earrings made from a dismembered hand and a cobra. Yoginis are described in some of the earliest tantric texts. Seductive yet dangerous, these goddesses could transform into women, birds, tigers, or jackals as the mood took them. 2 of her 4 arms are decorated with cobra armlets, and she holds a skull cup for alcohol or blood and a skull-topped staff. Her wild hair fans out behind her in fiery waves. This sculpture is part of a group that would have once been enshrined in a temple dedicated to the Yoginis. Between the 10th and 13th centuries, royal patrons commissioned Yogini temples across India. Rulers believed that yoginis could predict the future, protect their kingdoms against disease or enemy armies, and help them win new territories. This space evoked an imaginative and immersive recreation of one of the most famous yogini temples in India, which is located in Hirapur in Odisha and was built around the 10th century. We wanted to transport visitors to a time when devotion to these goddesses was at its height. Here is the original temple in Hirapur. Most yogini temples were circular and unique in their roofless design, perhaps in order to attract the yoginis from the sky into the sacred courtyard. In the exhibition, we showed 12 of the 64 yoginis which encircle the temple's interior walls. Here are details of some of the yoginis at Hirapur. Some stand and dance upon animals that they can shapeshift into. Others balance upon corpses and dismembered heads, and some drink from skull cups. For the imaginative evocation of the temple, we took inspiration from medieval Sanskrit texts, which describe the kinds of tantric rituals that may have been carried out within these spaces, including the consumption and offering of wine, blood, and flesh, which were believed to energize the yoginis. These specialist rituals were considered most effective when carried out at night. The temple would have also invited devotional worship from visitors during the day. So we wanted to play with that idea of private and public forms of devotion by evoking the temple in nocturnal and daytime settings. In our focus groups conducted during the early development stages of the show, visitors liked that idea of immersive techniques to give a sense of time and place. Since the yoginis are central to an understanding of Tantra and its relationship with divine feminine power, and they have a special place within Tantric practice, we wanted them to be a focus in the exhibition. Since many of the sculptures in the first part of the show originate from medieval Indian temples, we also wanted to evoke a sacred, monumental space that was simultaneously unique in its architectural design and closely associated with tantric deities and practice. The space in the show draws imagery and inspiration from the Hirapur temple without attempting to replicate it exactly. We worked with a company called Center Screen to achieve this using a mix of graphics, lighting, and projection. The film became more creative and evocative during the nocturnal scene. We wanted to subtly suggest the flight and shape-shifting powers of the yoginis using different aesthetic effects, for example, the flight of birds and bats. The challenge, of course, was to do this without it feeling orientalist or exoticizing. It was important to keep this creative part of the film simple and to ground it in the words of Sanskrit texts describing the yoginis. We also decided to hone in on details of the yogini sculptures themselves, including their attributes such as cobras and skull cups, and amplify them as another way of grounding the creative approach and highlighting the primary source material. Tantra's affirmation of the divine feminine was radical for its time, but how did this inform the lives of real women? One of the recurring themes of the exhibition explored how Tantra's emphasis on feminine power not only informed the rise of goddess worship in India, but also how this in turn affected the status of women. Earlier Hindu and Buddhist traditions taught that the female body was an impediment to achieving enlightenment, and that women should remain submissive and dependent on men. Tantra, on the other hand, taught that women could achieve rapid enlightenment because they were natural embodiments of Shakti. Many tantric texts even say that for this reason, women should be venerated as goddesses in their own right. The ultimate aim of tantric practice is to become a deity, to fully internalize their power. Tantric images re-envisioned women as independent practitioners who were capable of achieving self-deification. We see this through the historical figure of Karaikal Amaya, who lived in Tamil Nadu in South India in the 6th century. According to popular accounts of her life, she was a very beautiful, very dutiful wife, but she was harboring a desire to pursue her own radical spiritual quest. She eventually abandoned her role as an obedient wife to become a follower of the god Shiva. She asked Shiva to replace her beauty with a fearsome appearance which echoed Chamunda's. Here you can see she has assumed that fierce appearance. She's skeletal and has bulbous eyes and fangs. This is a modern representation of her that we have in the collection. For the exhibition, we were lucky enough to include a medieval sculpture of her from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. She's shown here reciting one of her visionary poems, accompanying herself with a pair of cymbals. In one of her poems, she describes her time spent meditating in a cremation ground, Chamunda's favourite haunt, where she confronts and conquers her own ego and fear of mortality. In the cremation ground, where you hear crackling noises, and the white pearls fall out of the tall bamboo, the ghouls with frizzy hair and drooping bodies, shouting with wide open mouths, come together and feast on the corpses. In rejecting her social role and assuming a transgressive tantric one, she achieved an enlightened state. Today she's regarded as both a devotional and tantric icon and is venerated as a saint across Tamil Nadu. Women played important roles not only as independent masters, but also as tantric gurus or teachers who initiated disciples and shared otherwise secret teachings with them, including rituals for achieving union with a deity and access to a range of powers. This painting from around 1750 shows a noble woman who has travelled a great distance to visit two female tantric masters who are seated on the left. She appears to be seeking counsel or initiation from the elder woman, whose age is expressively suggested with sensitive attention to detail. Many tantric texts describe women as superior teachers in their embodiment of Shakti. One example says that, quote, "There are no rules for women. All are said to be gurus." The two female tantric masters on the left have long dreadlocks. One is wearing them piled on top of her head. They're both wearing small horns around their necks, which identifies them as members of the Nath order, a tantric community founded around the 12th century. The Nath order famously popularized tantric yoga, which involved awakening an individual source of Shakti at the base of the spine through breath control. This awakening was believed to trigger instant enlightenment and offer a range of other powers, from long life to invulnerability. Rulers across India were attracted to tantric masters as agents of power who could strengthen and lend authority to their political positions. This included the Mughal dynasty, who arrived from Central Asia in the 16th century. They commissioned some of the earliest detailed representations of women as gurus, including this one. The images that we've seen representing goddesses and women transcend conventional representations of femininity and womanhood, whether as wife, mother, or lover, by inhabiting a role beyond the parameters of societal expectations. The allure of Tantra retained a hold over those in positions of power between the 16th and 19th centuries. One form of tantric practice that became particularly popular was Hatha yoga, or the yoga of force, the form of yoga popularized by the Nath order. Where earlier forms of yoga focused on concentration and mindfulness to escape the body, Hatha Yoga harnessed the body itself as a sacred instrument to channel and master cosmic energy. The main competing powers at this time were the Hindu Rajput rulers of the northwest, the Islamic rulers of independent sultanates to the south, and the Mughal rulers of an empire that came to dominate India by the late 17th century. Members of these courts commissioned works representing the practice of Hatha Yoga, as well as the lives of the men and women who practiced it. This Mughal painting depicts a yogi in the guise of Bhairav having a vision of a Tantric goddess in a cremation ground. Yogis used complex postures and muscular contractions to direct the flow of breath. Techniques included visualizing the goddess Kundalini, an individual source of Shakti, as a serpent at the base of the spine. Around her is a network of energy centers known as chakras, each of which contains a deity. Together they make up the yogic body. Through breath control, Kundalini rises like a current, infusing the chakras with power. Awakening Kundalini became the practitioner's ultimate goal. This cosmic vision of the body is what's being visualized in this painting from the Welcome collection. This is very much about transformation in the world via the body, rather than transcendence of the world. Various yogi sects in India came to practice Hatha Yoga, but as mentioned, the one most popularly associated with its development was the Tantric Nath order. Here on the left, a ruler visits a group of Nath yogis. They held political sway with rulers who consulted them as advisors to empower their sovereignty. Aside from the alchemical transformations they enacted within their bodies, Nath yogis also became famous for producing alchemical concoctions using mercury, which promised longevity. The awe that mercury inspired is vividly imagined in Mughal paintings representing a woman on horseback luring the silvery liquid out of a well, like we see here. This was regarded as the seminal fluid of Shiva, a major source of his power, which Nath yogis were believed to be able to harness and distill. The next section of the exhibition explored the spread of Tantric Buddhism across Asia via pilgrimage networks. Also known as Vajrayana, or the Path of the Thunderbolt, it flourished in eastern India. Buddhist monasteries studied and taught the Tantras and attracted pilgrims from across Asia. This led to the rapid transmission of Vajrayana teachings. Tibet saw the founding of major monasteries, which became the new political players and often rivaled one another. Instrumental in the transmission of Tantric teachings from India to the Himalayas were the Mahasiddhas, or great accomplished ones. Their life stories are filled with miraculous events, and they became hugely popular in Tibet. They wear human bone ornaments in imitation of Tantric deities. This painting depicts the Mahasiddha Saraha in the center. He composed songs about the body as a channel to enlightenment. This is part of a series of paintings of Mahasiddhas made for a Tibetan monastery, and we discovered that on the reverse of each one is the outline of a stupa, a Buddhist shrine, and a symbol of the enlightened mind of a Buddha. 3 Tibetan syllables for body, speech, and mind are written along the center, a mantra designed to consecrate the painting and to make it a suitable receptacle for the divine. The inscriptions along the base of the stupa include auspicious verses for the welfare of all beings. A pair of handprints is also visible on either side. They must have belonged to a senior lama who blessed and sanctified the tanka after its completion. Jalandhara is revered as a Mahasiddha in Tibet, and is also revered by the Nath Yogis in India as one of their first teachers. In both Buddhist and Hindu contexts, he's regarded as a master of Tantric yoga. This important bronze of him performing Tantric yoga was a loan from the Rubin Museum in New York. He's balancing on a personification of his own ego, which he has transcended. One of the themes the exhibition explored was the role of sex and divine union in Tantra in order to confront some of the more prevalent stereotypes. In Tantric texts, gendered symbolism is often used to articulate the two qualities to be cultivated on the path towards enlightenment: wisdom and compassion. These are visualized as a goddess representing wisdom and a god representing compassion. These are imagined in sexual union, as we see with this Tibetan bronze, in which the goddess swings one leg over the god's thigh in a passionate embrace. The goal is to internalize their qualities by visualizing the deities uniting within the body through meditation. This Tibetan tanka shows two deities embracing. Their red-rimmed, wild eyes and laughing, fanged mouths suggest their immense power. They are deities to be adored as well as emulated. The image evokes the interplay of feminine wisdom and masculine compassion within the practitioner's body. Both deities hold up weapons with which they destroy misplaced pride, attachment, anger, ignorance, and worldly desire. The Tantric text here describes the benefits of ritually engaging in sexual rites in order to transcend desire itself, healing an internal obstacle by strategically embracing and affirming it. The line, "By passion the world is bound, by passion too it is released," is inscribed on this folio. Even a celibate monk or nun could engage with this concept through visualizing deities in union. You'll notice the deities here are both wearing crowns of human skulls, and he's carrying a skull cup in one of his many hands. The representation, as well as the use of human remains in tantric practice, is a reminder of the impermanence of the body and the importance of overcoming attachment to the idea of a fixed self. In Tibet, practitioners often left their skulls and other bones after their death to a lama and to monasteries in order to gain spiritual merit in the next life. This part of the exhibition was developed in consultation with members of the Tibetan community and scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. During workshops, we discussed the role, history, and care of ritual objects made with human remains. In the show, we included the voices and perspectives of members of the Tibetan community who took part in the workshops via audio stops. Visitors could hear contributors discuss their personal perspectives on the use of human remains in Tantric Buddhism and what these objects meant to them. This example of a skull cup ornamented with a metal base and cover may have been used for an inner offering rite, during which the practitioner visualizes the skull as his or her own severed head, into which they pour their internal poison obstacles, such as self-grasping. The practitioner then imagines the contents brought to boiling point and transformed into a nectar of enlightenment. As part of the ritual, they drink the consecrated liquid from the skull cup, often in the form of alcohol or tea. The ritual serves to jolt the practitioner and unlock him or her from attachment to a fixed sense of self and its resulting cravings. This Tibetan painting from the Rubin Museum represents the renowned female tantric master Machi Glabdrun. She lived in the 11th century. She introduced new tantric practices designed to overcome the fear of death and attachment to self, and initiated hundreds of disciples. She's most famous for popularizing the practice known as chu, meaning to cut, which involved the use of human remains used as instruments like the ones shown here. It entailed the visualization of the dissection of one's own body and by extension the ego, which is presented as an offering to divine spirits. She advised carrying out chu at night in a frightening place such as a charnel ground in order to directly confront the limitations of one's fear and to conquer it. The goal of the practice is to sever and dismember all ties to the idea of a fixed self. The sounds of a two-headed skull drum and a trumpet made from a human thigh bone invite the spirits to devour the body during this ritual. In the accompanying audio stop, visitors could listen to Lama Rinzin, a respected Tibetan monk from the Kagyu tradition based in Sheffield, as he performed an abbreviated version of the chu ritual using a thigh bone trumpet and drum. The role of human remains in Tantra is still misunderstood in the West. This goes back to the 19th century colonial period when British officials encountered these instruments and associated them with black magic. This leads us to the penultimate part of the exhibition, which explored the role of Tantra during British rule in India and how Tantric goddesses were harnessed for their insurgent potential during the fight for Indian independence. The exhibition presented a critical approach to empire that emphasized South Asian voices and agency and decentered Eurocentric narratives. It was also important to highlight the fact that colonial misunderstandings of Tantra went on to inform stereotypes of it as a cult connected to sex and black magic. Throughout history, the Tantric goddess Kali has been both a protective mother and a revolutionary icon for her devotees. This figure dates to the late 19th century and was made in Bengal, which was an early centre of Tantra. Clay sculptures of the goddess like this are made every year for the Kali festival, which takes place in the autumn and is one of the biggest festivals in Bengal. They're housed in temporary shrines, which are set up on street corners, and devotees visit each one, providing the goddess with offerings. It's believed that images of Kali become enlivened when ritually venerated in this way. A garland of severed heads hangs from her neck, corpses from her ears, and hands from her girdle. In her upper left hand she would have carried a sword, which is now lost. The lower left hand carries a severed head. Her mouth is smeared with blood, and she sticks out her tongue as though thirsting for more. Tantric texts describe her as having a gaping mouth with which she devours negative and demonic forces. Although she appears fierce, she's approached as a mother figure. The severed heads represent the human ego, which Kali helps devotees transcend. Her top right hand displays a gesture of fearlessness to reassure and protect devotees. She's shown standing on her husband, the god Shiva. According to Tantric belief, existence itself results from the erotic union between Shakti as creative force, embodied here by Kali, and Shiva as pure consciousness. The symbolism of Kali striding over Shiva reflects her superiority, as without her he would remain inert and the universe would perish. Without Shakti, Shiva is literally a shava or corpse, emphasized here by his deathly pallor. Ramprasad Sen was a Tantric mystic who presented Kali as a ruthless yet compassionate mother. Here he sings about Kali, followed by the goddess herself. She carries the sword of wisdom, which symbolizes the destruction of the ego. Ramprasad's poetry describes his relationship with Kali as that of lover and beloved. As he says in one of his poems, "She's playing in my heart. All I ask, my crazy mother, is that you stay put." His verse resonated at a time of crisis in Bengal. The British East India Company raised land taxes even as crops in the region failed, transferring the wealth back to Britain. This led to the Bengal famine in 1770 and to the deaths of over 1 million people. Kali became an icon of strength, promoted through poetry and public festivals. Kali's popularity became a focus for revolutionary politics during the late 19th century. At the time, Bengal was not only a tantric centre, but also the nucleus of British rule. Kali gripped the British psyche as an icon of horror and irrationality. Colonial officials completely misunderstood her symbolism and assumed she was demonic. In one of the first studies of Hinduism for the West, the company soldier Edward Moore included this image on the left of the goddess and emphasized her demonic qualities. The text accompanying this image of Kali asks the reader to, quote, "Picture to himself this goddess of horrid form, of gigantic proportions smeared with blood, and imagine what a hold such a religion must have on the sensibilities of its followers." Back in London, William Blake bought a copy of this book and based a painting of Lucifer on this print. Colonial anxieties around Kali would escalate with the rise of anti-colonial movements in Bengal. In 1917, a report was published detailing the terrorist activities of Bengali revolutionaries and their allegiance to Kali. This is its frontispiece. We borrowed the original report from the British Library. The author, who was the Director of Criminal Intelligence, was disturbed by rumours surrounding their secret cult-like rituals believed to involve the consecration of bombs to the goddess. Indian revolutionaries in Bengal effectively exploited British fears and misconceptions of the goddess as a bloodthirsty demon mother and harnessed her as an anti-colonial symbol. We can see this through this particular print, produced about 1895 by a studio in Calcutta, the capital of Bengal. This example continued to circulate after 1905, when Bengal was partitioned by the British to weaken the growing independence movement. Kali's sacrificial heads assumed an alternative meaning here. A colonial administrator anxiously described this image as featuring what appeared to be British-looking heads, a prediction of the fall of the British Empire, which led to its censorship. Perhaps he was right to be concerned. By this time, Kali was regarded by many as a symbol of Mother India rising up against her colonizers. In 1905, a writer for a seditious Bengali newspaper proclaimed, "Rise up, O sons of India. The foreign empire draws to an end, for behold, Kali rises in the east." I think it's this synthesis of modern politics and religious myth that make these images of Kali so fascinating. Aside from Kali, one of the most powerful icons employed by revolutionaries was the tantric goddess Chinnamasta. Here she clutches her own severed head, which drinks one of the 3 streams of blood spurting from her neck. The other 2 streams nourish her attendants. She stands upon the deities of love and desire, as if to suggest she transcends desire while also being fundamentally supported by it. The image communicates the inseparability and interdependence of sex, life, and death. A Bengali text described Chinnamasta as a symbol of the motherland, decapitated by the British, but preserving her vitality by drinking her own blood, representing an ideal of heroic fearlessness and self-sacrifice. In the final part of the exhibition, we explored how Tantra has been reimagined from the 20th century until today. Following the independence of India and Pakistan in 1947, artists sought to forge modern national styles influenced by the art of the past to assert a new aesthetic identity. Many were inspired by the philosophical and countercultural elements of Tantra. Artists associated with the Neo-tantra movement in the 1970s adopted tantric symbols and adapted them to speak to the visual language of global modernism, particularly abstract expressionism. In this painting by Santosh, who was born in Kashmir, limbs emerge from an oval, egg-like shape to suggest a genderless figure seated in a cross-legged yoga pose known as the lotus position. The head is replaced by an orange trident, the emblem of Shiva. This painting by Bangladeshi artist Birunde reflects the influence of the concentric shapes of mandalas, which frame luminous central deities. This center point is also understood as an expression of cosmic creation. Day used color to suggest light and energy flowing from the center of his own paintings. In Britain and the States, Tantra had an important impact on the period's radical politics, where it was interpreted as a movement that could inspire anti-capitalist, ecological, and free love ideals. In the West, Tantra was reimagined as a cult of ecstasy that could challenge stifled attitudes to sexuality. Here we can see a pair of London-based designers drew on tantric images of deities in union to communicate this ideal. This poster advertises the Human Being Festival held in San Francisco, which heralded the Summer of Love of 1967. Yoga and meditation were promoted as transformative practices that could inspire minds to challenge the status quo. The poster includes a portrait of a yogi taken in Nepal. Yogis captured the popular imagination in the West as countercultural role models, famously yogis like Maharishi Mahesh and Osho. The impact of Tantra on musicians was also explored in this section. Mick Jagger had this logo designed for the Rolling Stones, inspired by Kali. It focuses on her protruding tongue, an attribute of the goddess originally suggesting her ravenous appetite on the battlefield. Here it was chosen to convey the band's rebellious anti-establishment spirit and to allude to Jagger's voluptuous mouth. This was first reproduced on the inner sleeve of their Sticky Fingers album in 1971. From the 1960s, American jazz music drew on global sources. The decolonization of territories across Africa and Asia, along with the rise of the Black Power movement, fostered new forms of Black spirituality. The jazz trumpeter Don Cherry was inspired by tantric traditions and studied under the Indian musician and mystic Pran Nath. Here he's presented as a yogi with a Buddhist deity above him. This record of his from 1977 includes chanted mantras, which are tantric power words that embody the nature of a deity. He presents himself here as a yogi in the lotus posture. In the exhibition, we played one of his tracks called Mahakali, or Great Kali, which begins with Tibetan bells and continues with a trumpet-sitar dialogue before erupting into a hailstorm of electric guitar chords and drum beats, as if to signal the goddess Kali's dramatic arrival. Today, Tantra is as alive as ever. Sects in India, including the Yoginis, reveal its enduring power. These images are from an archive of photographs of yogis associated with different sects in India and Nepal, taken by the Dutch photographer Dolf Hartzucker. He conducted interviews with the men and women he photographed as part of his fieldwork. So every photograph in the exhibition was contextualized with information about the person and their background in order to avoid an ethnographic display approach. The practices of the Agoris include smearing their bodies with the ash of burnt corpses from funerary pyres, as seen here, which is traditionally deemed polluting. For the Agoris, transgressive practices are an expression of the Tantric assertion that all is sacred, and there is no distinction between what is conventionally perceived as pure and impure, just as there is no distinction between the self and the divine. By shattering society's cultural conditioning of the mind, the Agoris transcend ego-led emotions, such as fear and aversion, and instead nurture a non-discriminating attitude that affirms the power of the taboo. This photo shows an Agori drinking out of a skull cup. He belongs to an ashram dedicated to treating leprosy. From the 1960s, the Agoris began to turn their ashrams into social service centres dedicated to helping those stigmatized by society, whether through caste, disease, or disability. In this part of the show, we also included a short film featuring a performance by Parvati Baul. She's a member of the Baul sect, who are wandering bards with close ties to Tantra, mainly based in Bengal and Bangladesh. They're famous for their mystical songs performed with stringed instruments, centering on the idea that divinity is present and accessible within the human body. Parvati, a practitioner and teacher, was drawn towards the Baul way of life at the age of 16. As she put it in an interview, Baul freedom is limitless. It gives one such a sense of peace and goes beyond religion, caste, creed, and any limited identities. Parvati gave a special live virtual performance as part of the exhibition's public programme, which you can watch on the museum's events channel on YouTube. Tantra has gone on to influence modern feminist thought and artistic practice. Contemporary female artists have been inspired by Tantric iconography and have also playfully subverted it. Although many, if not most, Tantric traditions emphasize the role of women and goddesses, their traditional representations have sometimes been described as male constructions of femaleness. Certainly, their often ambivalent characteristics, veering between overt eroticism and destructive violence, can be read as reflecting a male fear of feminine power. Nevertheless, this same ambivalence, which challenged traditional models of womanhood, has been a source of empowerment for modern women who continue to reclaim their spiritual authority in creative and emancipatory ways. The exhibition ended with dramatic works of art which harness tantric goddesses through the bodies of real women, evoking them in a feminist guise, including this one. The title of this almost 3-meter tall mixed media painting, Housewives with Steak Knives, challenges the stereotype of the submissive wife confined to the kitchen. It's by the Bengal-born British artist Shrutapa Biswas. Here the housewife, as Kali, wears a garland of heads that the artist describes as figureheads of authoritarian patriarchy. Like Biswas, Bharti Kaur, born in London and now based in Delhi, draws on the bodies of real women in her creation of a series of life-size urban goddesses. This figure blurs the boundaries between mortal and divine. It presents the self-decapitated goddess Chinnamasta with copper wires spurting from her neck like jets of blood. She holds a teacup, a witty allusion to British civility, which has become a substitute for a tantric skull cup, about to be filled with blood. In her left hand, Chinnamasta holds a cast of the skull of Lucy, the oldest known human ancestor. This nod to human origins alludes to Chinnamasta herself as an embodiment of the foundation and cycle of life. She's ambiguously depicted as either penetrating or being penetrated, unifying both the feminine creative force and masculine consciousness that animates the universe. Bhatti describes the goddesses she's attracted to as androgynous and strangely masculine. The exhibition aimed to offer new insights into a philosophy that has shaped lives and captured imaginations for more than a millennium. From its beginnings to the present day, Tantra has challenged not only gender norms, but also religious, cultural, and political establishments. The show charted Tantra's enduring potential for opening up new ways of seeing and changing the world. It's hoped that the case studies in the exhibition will have enabled the visitor to recognise certain symbols and iconographic patterns as central to the Tantric imaginary, allowing them to read the philosophy through its imagery. Above all, I hope visitors will have been stimulated and challenged to question their own ideas about the nature of the divine. Thank you very much for having me, and thanks everyone for coming.